Hello everyone, Marty Braden here. I know it's been a while, man, but before I jump right into part two of the 10-part series of videos I was doing, I want to apologize for the delay and give you a brief explanation as to the circumstances surrounding the delay and explain the unedited video that went live over the past several days. As I wrote in the comment section to that unedited video, I have since taken down that video. I had mentioned that someone had come into my home and smashed all of my wife's and my devices. Our big screen TV, her laptop and two monitors, and my laptop and my large monitor. And so we've been without any device so that we could do work and produce videos, etc. We just haven't had anything. And even the TV was gone. As much as it pains me, and after much reflection, I felt an obligation to give my viewers a little more details on this so that it doesn't keep you in the dark as to what happened and get some of your imaginations running wild. So my wife and I have had 8 children. 2 of them have gone on ahead to their glory, and the remaining 6 children are all married and growing their families, except one of our 5 sons, who is 39, and he has some very difficult mental disability. This is the family member who had been staying with us for several months after a very difficult time in his life back in December of last year. A week and a half ago, he came home from a counseling session while my wife was working from home. She works from home until the end of this year, and she retires. Anyway, we're not sure what triggered it, but he boiled over into a rage and grabbed a very large 3-foot-long set of pruning shears and began smashing things, the big screen TV, and he was screaming like a banshee. It scared my wife to death, so she ran to her room, and I was a long way away along the Washington Street in another city, and the police called me and said, come home immediately. So I drove home. Anyway, to cut this sad story short, let me just say that he was just taken to jail and is awaiting to meet before the judge for sentencing. Kathleen and I sincerely hope that the judge will mandate now the help that he needs to get him to a mental facility to get that help, which we weren't able to give him, obviously, while he was staying with us. I know you all know that there are literally hundreds of thousands of families all across America who have a family member or a dear friend with similar stories as this one. It is a most difficult and emotionally stressful circumstances, that's for sure, for those with loved ones with this disability. Many of you have been faced with having to deal with individuals and or a family member with a similar circumstance. I will say that my wife and I are learning a great deal about life and about God's dealings with his children, who are all living here on this fallen world. I also like I mentioned before, I went to speak at a conference in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, and came home and immediately caught COVID, and that lasted 14 days, and then my wife and I were brought in and called on a service mission, and so there you go. Life's a joy with a few distractions. So that's it. I'm going to jump in and do part 2 now, video. So let's go ahead and do that. Hello everyone, Marty Braden here. Welcome to my channel. To all of you who are watching for the very first time, let me say I hope you find it to be an uplifting and an edifying experience. Today's video is the second part of a 10-part series of videos I'm doing on the big questions that Dr. John Dehlin asked the Paul brothers during a recent interview he did with them on his Mormon Stories podcast. I've chosen 10 questions out of that he asked the Paul brothers during that interview that I thought would be the most helpful ones to give an answer to each of you who have any degree of cognitive dissonance and therefore would like to have and understand what a Latter-day Saints perspective is on these faith-challenging topics. If this is your first time watching a video of mine and you want to understand the why I am doing this 10-part series as part of my Dispelling the Accusatory Fog series of videos, you may want to go and watch the first video, part 1, that I did in this 10-part series, where I explain the what and why behind my taking on these big questions that Dr. John Dehlin directed to the hosts of the YouTube channel, The Stick of Joseph, whose hosts, of course, are the Paul brothers, Hayden and Jackson Paul. Each thumbnail pic of this series of videos will look exactly the same, except I put a question along with the video part number in the right-hand corner of each thumbnail. That's how you can tell them apart, okay? So let's go ahead and go on. Today's video, like I said, is part 2, and in it, I will be covering the second big question Dr. Dehlin asked the Paul brothers. So let's go ahead and watch that.
Okay, so what do y'all think about evolution that started out as, some type of life, simple life forms, and we've evolved from lower life forms as humans? What do y'all think about evolution?
Like all other big questions asked by Dr. Dehlin, this big question cannot be answered with a verbose one-sentence answer. In fact, I have a category in my YouTube channel's playlist titled Evolution. In it, I've saved nearly 100 videos covering the subject of evolution at length from my Latter-day Saint perspective. The most mentioned type of evolution today is Charles Darwin's theory of biological evolution, with the chief tenet being natural selection. Darwin presented it in his book, The Origins of the Species, which was published back in 1859. That was 165 years ago, by the way. This theory launched an everlasting debate regarding the origin of man, and the theory's roots stem from one of two prevailing and conflicting worldviews: atheism and theism. This evolution theory of late has had a great many scientists questioning its validity due to the recent discoveries gleaned from the newest scientific research of the last couple of decades. I won't go into those discoveries at this time, but you can go and learn all about them by checking out my channel's playlist category titled Evolution and watch each one of the videos I've saved there. There are, however, a couple of videos I suggest you absolutely should watch. The first one is a video that I'm going to share a short clip from here in just a moment. It's titled Genesis Impact, full movie, and I'll put these all down in the description. And the second one is Evolution, Bacteria to Beethoven. The Paul brothers, having stepped into the fray of this big question that Dr. Dehlin posed to them, and I'm not going to criticize them when I say this, but they should have begun their answer by asking Dr. Dehlin, which type of evolution are you talking about, John? And that's because there's currently 4 forces of evolution today: mutation, gene flow, genetic drift, and natural selection. There's also basically 3 different theories of evolution that have garnered the attention of experts over the past several years since Darwin's theory popped into existence. American historian, author, and former geophysicist Professor Stephen Meyer has a book with 3 other scientists titled Theistic Evolution. It discusses these 3 types of evolution, beginning with Darwin's theory of natural selection. The other 2 are the mutation theory of evolution and the modern synthetic theory of evolution. So, with that setting of the table, let me share a clip from Genesis Impact, full movie, which discusses why Darwin's theory of evolution, and in particular its chief tenet, natural selection, is fast becoming obsolete and a doubted theory. Dr. Myers even wrote a book about this scientific doubting called Darwin's Doubt. So here you go, let's listen.
You see, there's one simple question, and depending on how we answer that question, can cause our lives to hang in the balance. Where do we come from?
What compelling evidence is there for evolution?
I mean, we have fossils, you can see it in certain bones, like we have whales who have, I believe it's tailbones left over, or hips.
Well, I think over time, we evolved.
The apes are like, you can see them evolving to look like us.
We actually have 99% DNA shared with them.
You can look at species like green tree pythons or emerald tree boas, who both have convergent evolutions with their onogenic color changes. And they're across the world, they're completely different species, they're completely different genuses, and they both have developed similar evolutions for that.
So can you observe evolution taking place? I mean, doesn't it take millions of years?
I believe that there are actually some cases of squirrels developing resistances to certain venoms. Like,
hey, sweetheart. What are you watching?
Up north developing.
It's an old video I found online. People talking about the origins of life.
In what way? Physical features. So you think you're a talking primate?
Maybe not like right now, but like, I guess in the past.
Do you really believe you're a primate? Talking primate?
Yeah, I do.
Do you think man has a common ancestor with primates?
Yeah, for sure.
Do you believe in evolution?
Yes. How sad.
Do you think you have a common ancestor with primates?
Well, I'm not a biologist, so
what
I'm
if
not
they're right?
Super specific questions. I mean, I believe I do have a
And
common
we're
ancestor,
wrong.
yes.
You're a talking primate?
What would make you say that? What do you mean?
How closely related we are?
I don't know. It's just Connor and I were talking about creation, and he said some things that got me thinking. I mean, the scientific evidence for evolution is pretty overwhelming. What if God used evolution?
What do you believe?
Honestly, I don't know anymore.
I remember I was just a little bit older than you when I had some of these same questions. I was fascinated with how we came into existence. So I studied both sides of the argument. And it all changed for me one day.
How?
I went to a lecture at the Natural History Museum. There was a man there. He was giving a lecture on the evidence of human evolution.
Museum today. I encourage you to visit the exhibits that will help you visualize what we've discussed today. And these exhibits should be marked in the maps that we provided for you. First, we have a wonderful exhibit that shows that apes and humans share about 98% of their DNA. Now remember, after 6 million years, the human line diverged from chimps based on this 1 to 2% DNA difference. We also have fossil evidence of key ape to human icons. We also have the human family tree exhibit, which shows the slow progression of human evolution over millions of years. And of course, this exhibit, it proves that human evolution is a clear fact. Now, in closing today, we've seen that the Earth has gradually changed over millions of years and that the continents have drifted. Radiometric dating has solidly established that the Earth is billions of years old, leaving plenty of time for the engine of evolution, natural selection, and mutation to drive evolutionary progress. Now, Charles Darwin may have discovered the key principles of human evolution that we base these principles on, but it is my hope that you, the next generation, would take these theories and continue to help us prove just how evolution happens. Now, with that, I'll open up the floor to any questions you may have. Okay, well, thank you for your time and enjoy the museum.
Sir, I have a question. Well, quite a few questions, actually.
Okay, go ahead. Ask away.
Well, you mentioned that one of the leading evidences that humans evolved from an ape-like ancestor is that human and chimp DNA is 98% similar.
Yes.
Well, how big is the human genome? How many base pairs?
Well, the exact figure varies over the years, but the last count was 3.097 billion base pairs.
And how about chimps?
The last count was 3.231 billion.
Okay, so chimps have about 134 million more base pairs than we have, which means their genome is about 4.3% bigger. How is it possible to say that our DNA is like 98% similar when actually it's 4.3% bigger?
Well, when they made the comparison between our genome and theirs, they were so different that they had to break them apart into chunks that were similar, and then the comparisons were made.
Well, how much of the human and chimp genome did they leave out?
Well, when they came up with the 98% similarity figure, they excluded 25% of the human genetic material and 18% of the chimps.
Isn't that called cherry picking?
Well, you may see it that way.
Sure seems like it to me.
I'm sorry for stopping it there, but there's just not enough time to watch this in its entirety for this video. But let me just say that the young woman goes on to talk about the so-called discovered missing links of Artie, Lucy, Homo habilis, and the Neanderthals, which supposedly all lived millions of years ago on this planet called Earth, each being an iteration of man's development. But the young woman asking all the questions debunks every single one of the professor's arguments from his presentation as the video goes on. It's incredible, so be sure to watch the rest of it to see how she dismantles each theory's piece by piece by piece. It also discusses the multiple layers of dinosaur bones intact in a huge sedimentary petrified graveyard with some of its fossilized dinosaur bones still having soft tissue in them, as well as a brief discussion comparison on the radiometric carbon dating and why it isn't as reliable as scientists have made it to be for dating such fossils and artifacts. It even mentions several peer-reviewed papers that refer to the evidence of Noah's flood that's been discovered over the past half century. So, if you want to hear the other side of the story regarding evolution, I really strongly suggest you finish watching this video and some of the other ones saved in my playlist evolution category. Now, with this additional setting of the table, I want you to consider the simplest way to define evolution. And I like simple. It's because it's done in just 3 words: change through time. Life has a long history, and it has changed quite a bit throughout its long history, resulting in the biodiversity that we see today. It comes down to biological evolution versus chemical evolution. Dr. Stephen Meyer has discussed the difference between biological evolution and chemical evolution at length in his books and classes, wherein he points out that modern science is struggling even more today to explain how non-living chemicals could have given rise to life. Dr. Meyer has submitted an annotated bibliography of 44 peer-reviewed scientific articles wherein they put forth scientific challenges to key tenets of Darwinian evolution. Dr. Meyer has also put forth several books covering the unique issues related to the controversy between evolution and intelligent design. In his books, Meyer has discussed the competing hypotheses of Darwinism and intelligent design, which, as I explained in part 1 of my 10 videos of this series, that both sides of the debate try to explain the same pieces of evidence, the same data, each side coming away with differing interpretations of the same evidence and data. So let's watch a clip from a video I saved in my evolution category titled Stephen C. Meyer, Theistic Evolution, so that you can get a sense of what I'm saying here, okay?
Many Christians today wrestle with this relationship. Just how should evolutionary theory and the biblical narrative relate to each other? The answers to this question vary widely, even among Christians, from those who totally accept a fully naturalistic evolutionary model and dismiss the Bible's input on origins questions, to those who do the opposite, who fully accept a literal biblical narrative and dismiss any input from science on the matter. Science is blinded to other viable options. And what are the theological and philosophical concerns that arise if one accepts an evolutionary explanation for human origins? Answering these questions is the motivation behind this book and of the event this evening. We're very privileged to have with us tonight 4 of the key contributors to this. So I get the privilege of being the MC here and to introduce Steve Meyer, just to give you a little bit of his biography. Stephen Meyer received his PhD in the philosophy of science from the University of Cambridge. That's how you say it, Cambridge. A former geologist and college professor, he now directs the Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture. He's authored most recently the New York Times bestseller, Darwin's Doubt, The Explosive Origin of Animal Life and the Case for Intelligent Design, as well as Signature in the Cell, DNA and the Evidence for Intelligent Design. That book was named a Book of the Year by the Times of London Literary Supplement in 2009. I first met Steve about 25 years ago here on Biola's campus. I just joined the faculty here in August of 1993. Steve was giving a presentation on intelligent design to the fall faculty workshop. And after I heard him speak and present for 2 days, I noticed that his wife was sitting in the back of the auditorium. And I walked up to her and I said, I don't know if you know this or not, but you're married to one of the 10 most important evangelical Christians who's alive in the world today. And I don't know if she ever told Steve that or this crazy guy who said that to her, but I think that's been borne out in Steve's work over the past 25 years. And it's a great privilege to have him speak to us this evening. Thank you, Steve.
But I only have one doctorate. It's really nice to be here, and it's really nice to talk about this book. JP and and Wayne and a British friend, Peter Luce, were the kind of prime movers behind this, had the inspiration for this, and we conceived of it originally as a reference work for theologians and pastors and biblical scholars, because we knew that many of those folks felt under pressure from the well-funded theistic evolutionary groups like the Biologos Institute in the United States, the Faraday Institute, the Center for Theology and Natural Sciences, many groups who had the same message, which is that if you're going to be a scientifically informed, in fact, reasonable person of faith, you need to embrace an evolutionary perspective. And so there's been this a kind of perspective that, a sense that that you have a kind of intellectual obligation if you're going to be a well-informed Christian or other person of faith, maybe Jewish, maybe theist of some other stripe, you've got to accept the Darwinian evolution if your viewpoint is to have any credibility. And the force of my talk tonight is to show that that's not true, that many people assume they must adopt a kind of evolutionary framework in the way they read Scripture because science has declared it so. And many think that they must also adopt an evolutionary understanding of biological origins, despite, as Dr. Grudem will show later tonight, there is a substantial cost to the coherence of some basic Christian doctrines by accepting this way of reading Scripture and understanding Christian doctrine. My talk is really about the science tonight, and whether or not we are under, or people of faith are under, that kind of an obligation, what philosophers would call an epistemic obligation. Does reason dictate, does science dictate that we must reformulate these basic doctrines? I won't talk too much about the effect of these scientific ideas on doctrine, but I do want to address this epistemological question. Is evolutionary theory so well established that it makes it compulsory to read Scripture in a completely different way, to adopt what you might call an evolutionary hermeneutic or framework? Now, it might be helpful to start by talking about just defining some terms. And in the book, in the first chapter of the book, it was part of my role in the project to write a scientific and philosophical introduction to the book. And one of the things I started by doing was simply to define the term theistic evolution.
Wasn't that helpful? Man, Dr. Mao is so incredibly bright. Anyway, in my book, An Atheist Delusion, I shared a great deal of commentary given by past and present prophets regarding this topic of evolution. You can go to page 57 in the introduction of my book and find what I said about it there. Here's just a few excerpts from those pages, and I quote, "Richard Dawkins' end-all to be-all argument for each of the big questions about life and how it began, about the universe and how it began, about whether or not there is life after death and whether or not God exists, seems to be evolution, and nothing but evolution, and its so-called crane of natural selection. All that Richard has learned about evolution, he conflates them down into his reason for disbelieving in God's existence." Let me share a few more points now from President Joseph Fielding Smith's book, Man, His Origin and Destiny, to help reaffirm the foundation for my counter-arguments and very unique perspective on Richard's book, The God Delusion. As I quoted earlier, President Joseph Fielding Smith mentioned that Charles Darwin indulges in a rather difficult struggle to close the gap between the mental powers of man and those of the lower animals. Quoting Mr. Darwin, President Smith said, quote, "Man bears in his bodily structure clear traces of his descent from some lower form, but it may be urged that, as man differs so greatly in his mental powers from all other animals, there must be some error in this conclusion. If no organic being excepting man had possessed any mental powers, as if his powers had been of a wholly different nature from those of the lower animals, then we should never have been able to convince ourselves that our high faculties had been gradually developed." Think about that. "We must also admit that there is much wider interval in mental power between one of the lowest fishes, as a lamprey or lancelet, and one of the higher apes than between an ape and man. Yet this interval is filled up by numberless gradations or iterations. End of quote. Charles Darwin, and quoting Joseph Smith now, after this introduction, this honorable gentleman, who erroneously glories in the thought that he has an amoeba, or perhaps rather the larvae of existing ascidians, as very distant grandparents, laboriously endeavors to show that this great dividing gulf should not be considered as beyond bridging in course of time. Then President Joseph Fielding Smith again quotes Darwin saying, "These lower animals and man have certain instincts in common, even as it is." End of Darwin's quote. And then continuing, President Joseph Fielding Smith again quotes, "Then he discourses on these instincts, which are enumerated as sexual love, the love of a mother for her newborn offspring, the desire possessed by the latter to suck, and so on and so on. I asked myself, was this advocate of organic evolution unaware of the fact that it was written in the scriptures that the Lord created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after its kind, and God saw that it was good. Likewise, he brought forth cattle and creepy things and beasts of the earth after their kind, and that all of these were commanded to multiply and fill the earth. How could they do all of this and keep this commandment if they had not been endowed with these instincts in common with man from their beginning? Of course, it is natural for a mother to have love for their young, for the Lord endowed her with it. Otherwise, the poor little animal would starve to death if it did not have the common instinct to seek its food. In all of this, these lower animals are faithfully performing the commandment of the Lord that he gave to them to obey. Then the discourse goes on to enumerate other instincts. And with this, I have no controversy, President Smith says, with Darwin, nor I with Dawkins, such as love, which the animals manifest. For all I know, animals may be able to count more than 4. At least they have the sense to distinguish between 2, 3 in a herd. I freely admit that many of them, in their wild state, gather in flocks and herds, and it is possible that they have some social aim in doing so, as well as considering it a means of protection. As a member of Christ's church on earth, I do not take the view that animals have no reason and therefore cannot think. I would have you check out the YouTube video Suda, the painting elephant, to consider what degree of intelligence and instinct God has given his animal creations. That's an incredible video. We have received divine knowledge or revelation that each of these possesses a spirit in the likeness of its body. Some might also say that they have consciousness, or a degree of it anyway. Each was created spiritually before it was created naturally and given a body for living on the earth. Naturally, then, there is some measure of intelligence in members of the animal kingdom. The fact remains, however, that they receive their place and their bounds by divine decree, which they cannot pass. I admit that many have a language or some power of communication, whether it be the elephant, the bear, the fox, the bee, the ant, the spider, or the bat. Just remember, though, that the amount or extent of their intelligence does not depend on the size of their brain. Judged by performance, the lowly ant manifests greater intelligence than Mr. Darwin's highest ape. This busy bee can travel for many miles and knows where it is going and its way home. Bees are organized and live within communities and work harmoniously together, and so do ants. Some animals may have some sense of beauty, and Mr. Darwin is right in saying birds build nests without having previous instruction. The snake-like eel and the humble salmon follow the habits of their ancestors without having been taught, and this is more than man can do. The eel from the streams of England, Holland, and other places finds its way to the deep waters of the Galapagos Sea and back again from whence it started, if I am rightly informed. The salmon, for example, leaves the waters where it was spawned for a life in the sea and then returns to the same stream from whence it left in its youth. It then comes home to spawn and die. Is this intelligence? Some might call it instinct. It certainly is a debatable question, isn't it? I have to give attention to the fact that all kingdoms have a law given to them. In the Doctrine and Covenants, section 88, verses 36 through 38, it says, all kingdoms have a law given, and there are many kingdoms, for there is no space into which there is no kingdom, and there is no kingdom into which there is no space, either a greater or a lesser kingdom. And unto every kingdom is given a law, and unto every law there are certain bounds, also and conditions. Man in the beginning was given laws pertaining to his or her being temporal, as well as spiritual. So were the beasts, the fowl, the fish. All creatures were given laws and commandments, which they cannot pass. Among these laws was the measure of intelligence which each possesses, and beyond the bounds of this decree they cannot go. Therefore the beast of the forest and the domesticated animal remains within the bounds they were divinely set at the beginning. Their measure of intelligence is fixed and limited. Not so with man, for he is the offspring of God and has been commanded to keep his commandments, with the promise that he may become perfect, even as his Father in heaven is perfect and complete. In Matthew 5:48 it says, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father who is in heaven is perfect," which, as I said, is attributed to be complete. President Smith continues, "I could go on, giving example after example of how we should marvel at the powers of the lower kingdom of animals that are greater than man, such as the sense of smell of a bloodhound, or the radar of bats. But for me, there is nothing in these acknowledgments that in the least gives evidence of any relationship between beast and man, genealogically speaking. The Almighty has not placed the requirement or responsibility upon the animal world, beast, reptile, fowl, or fish, to bow down and worship him. He placed each in its sphere and gave it commandments commensurate with its purpose. They have been commanded to multiply, not to pray. They increase after their kind, not pay homage. And to these commandments they are true and faithful. These commandments, to believe in God, to obey his commandments, to pray to him in the name of Jesus Christ, have been given to men and women everywhere throughout the world, in every dispensation of time. When men and nations have rebelled against his authority and commandments, they soon perish. We, the human family, have been commanded to be obedient and worship him, the creator of the earth and all things therein. And yet we find men and women otherwise intelligent in open rebellion and offering to him the greatest insult, denial of his existence. That's found in an atheist delusion. Men and women deny his fatherhood, his right to command and direct his creations. And in their open rebellion, they choose to worship an amoeba, a fish, a reptile, a cow, a baboon, even gods made of their own hands, gods of wood, stone, gold, and the arm of the flesh, and place them in their own personal, ancestral, or genealogical tree. Yes, I, as someone who has faith in this supreme being called God, the eternal Father, whose offspring we are, am willing to concede to the animals some measure of intelligence. But it is not intelligence gained over millions of years from iterations of mutations. It is intelligence given to us from God. In fact, I am happy in my belief that they have some mental powers, that they can think, that they may even have a sense of beauty, that they may exercise the spirit of pleasure and happiness. I'd have you look up recent YouTube video called "Two Chimpanzees Bathe a Dog." It's hilarious, where chimpanzees enjoy the pleasure of bathing a dog. They may become angry and remember a wrong committed against them, etc. All this, however, President Smith says, does not make them the offspring of God, nor does it indicate that the Almighty had nothing to do with their being in existence. It is too late to say anything that will do Mr. Darwin any good. He has gone where he has had the opportunity of learning of his folly, his delusion. But to others who are inclined to follow his lead, such as Mr. Dawkins, permit me to say that today, as just one example, we have the evidence that the Fuegians and the lower Bodocudos, see YouTube video titled With the Indians of Tierra del Fuego, they're descendants of a once righteous and delightsome people, an intelligent people who had the guidance of the Lord and his holy prophets among them. But because of their wickedness and rebellion against the living God, they were brought to the deplorable condition we now find them in. It's called a state of apostasy. The same conditions came upon many additional peoples because Satan came among them after they had been taught faith in God and had been given his commandments. Satan and his minions told them, "Believe it not." And we are informed that men began from that time forth to be carnal, sensual, and devilish. Mr. Darwin and his disciples, like Mr. Dawkins, speak glibly of the numberless gradations, all ranging from amoeba, worm, or other infinitesimal forms of life, up through the apes to higher apes and then to man. They speak as though this gradation process has been proven as settled fact. It has not been. These evolutionists say that the whale, the shark, and other inhabitants of the deep, as well as all manner of life upon the land, have shown numberless gradations to the final state in which man finds himself today. However, when challenged to show the world these gradations, these intermediates, just one kind jumping over to a totally different kind, they failed to do so. And so it begs the question, if there have been these numberless gradations, then the missing links connecting us with the amoeba or worm all the way up to the higher apes should be filling and walking upon the earth today with all their various stages of their new kind or kin. If it stopped somewhere along the way, why did it stop? But there isn't any. There may be small mutations within each kind or species of the same species, but never jumping over into a totally different kind. For example, a dog jumping over to producing a cat dog. All of them are in their finished, perfect form, just as God organized them when he said, and it is good. It's not necessary for our scientific brethren to search the deserts and the mountains and the depths of the sea trying to find these links, which have never been produced, nor will they ever be. That's the end of excerpts from President Joseph Fielding Smith's book, Man, His Origin and Destiny. With that said, anyone who has bought into what I believe to be a deception called evolution, a deception that teaches man's ascent from ape to the upright human being that we are today, I would simply encourage you to invest the time it takes to finish watching Genesis Impact full movie and the other videos I mentioned in this video as well. With some cases, I'm even persuaded to call their deception an outright lie. Again, I would have you watch the videos and see if you disagree or agree with me. There is also the YouTube video titled, You've Been Deceived. In this video, Dr. James Tour exposes the false science behind origin of life research. That's another battle in today's scientific community. It's just one more scam that's being perpetrated on the minds of our youth and young adults through the tool of today's educational institutions. It's a video that I really like because Dr. Tour is well accredited scientist and one of the brightest ones I'm ever been made aware of. He's an American chemist and a nanotechnologist. Boy, that's a nanotechnologist. He's also a professor of chemistry and a professor of materials science and nanoengineering at Rice University in Houston, Texas. Now, before I close this off, I want to share with you a few minutes of a third video of an atheist scientist who changed his mind about the data and became a believer, a Christian. It will help you get a clearer picture as to why some scientists today are changing their minds about the so-called same data regarding evolution.
I grew up as an atheist. I used to believe in long ages and evolution because that's what I was taught to believe.
What changed?
I went and studied and I went and researched and I did what scientists are supposed to do. Look at the data, look at the evidence, look at the experiments. I found the evidence so compelling. It was almost like why wasn't I told about this? As a scientist, I now believe in a young earth and a divine creation of life.
So you need to tell us about some of these evidences that frame your scientific thinking now. Can you start to take us through some of those?
Wasn't that thought-provoking? You may not agree, and that's okay, but I sure thought it was a fantastic video. You ought to go watch it. Even with the short clip I showed you, didn't you find it to be informative and worth looking into in more depth because of the points he took? And looking for the best resources to answer the question, what is the official stance of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, meaning its 15 general authority leaders, on evolution? For my book, I came across an article in the Daily Universe, an online Utah paper. It took what I believe to be a very fair and balanced historical approach to answering this question of what is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints' official position on the subject of evolution. Let me once again say that my book is not an official book of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, nor do I represent the church in any official way. But I did include this article in it because I consider it to be an accurate description of how I view evolution too. I would have you read this article as you consider what you yourself believe about the theory of evolution. It's written by Rachel Keeler and it's titled The Church and BYU, An Evolution of Evolution. It was written in July 30th of 2019. If you read it, and I hope you will, I believe you will come to understand more clearly my personal stance on and perspective on this controversial topic and how I would have answered Dr. Dehlin, just like the first big question I covered in my last video. As you can see, this big question regarding evolution cannot be answered with a single one-sentence platitude kind of answer. The fact is, not one of the big questions I'm going to be covering in the rest of my 10-part series videos can be answered with a glib, matter-of-fact short answer that our critics seem to think and expect that we should be able to provide them. Okay, in closing, I want to close this off. Let me say thank you again to all of you who are watching, and especially to those of you who are new to my channel. I appreciate you for taking the time out of your busy day to watch me share my perspective on these important subjects. And I sincerely hope you're going to go away with a better understanding of how you too can answer these big questions when someone asks them of you. It's important because such answers do in fact play an important role in dispelling the accusatory fog and in adding to the positive climate so that belief can flourish. Hopefully, they're also helping to clear up any cognitive dissonance that you or your family member might be struggling with. Or maybe it's your friend who's experiencing a full-out faith crisis at the present time. Let me know what I can do and what you think down in the comment string. Also, check out the video links in the description that I provided there. Just know that I want to help anyone in any way I can. And just click the subscription and the like, and just know that I wish you continued success, and may God bless you always. Goodbye.